Hey everyone, tonight we dive into the remarkable lives and raw resilience of medieval peasants. Those everyday heroes who, against all odds, managed to survive some of the coldest, cruelest nights history ever offered. From improvised insulation hacks to huddled sleeping strategies, their story is one of grit, inventiveness, and pure stubborn determination. So before you settle in, tap that like button and subscribe. But only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the reach of our little time machine across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum in the background, and let's ease into tonight's journey. When you picture medieval life, your mind might leap to knights in shining armor, grand feasts, and lively fairs. But for the average peasant, winter wasn't about merriment. It was about not dying. It wasn't just a season, it was an annual test, a merciless exam with no retakes. Imagine living in a tiny hut built of mud and sticks, walls so thin you could probably hear a squirrel sneeze outside. Insulation? A fantasy? Windows? Maybe a hole plugged with an animal skin? And thermostats? Please. Your home's inside temperature was just slightly less freezing than the outdoors. Emphasis on slightly. Nights were especially brutal. Darkness swallowed everything. Wind howled like a banshee and the fire struggled to do anything but warm the knees of whoever sat directly in front of it. If you were on the other side of the room, might as well be camping, with worse snacks. Your clothing didn't help much. Peasants didn't own thick furs or luxury bedding. You had maybe 2 scratchy wool tunics, a cloak that smelled suspiciously like goat, and the desperate hope that layering would somehow make you warm. Spoiler, it didn't. Beds? Forget it. You slept on a sack of hay, straw, and maybe a few flattened rushes, plus a complimentary colony of fleas. Welcome to the 5-star medieval peasant experience. The cold wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Frostbite, hypothermia, or just plain freezing to death were constant threats, especially for children and the elderly. Waking up each morning still breathing? That was basically a miracle, worth celebrating with a slightly less frozen breakfast turnip. So no, medieval winters weren't about higgy and hot cocoa. They were about clenching your jaw, piling on every piece of fabric you owned, snuggling up with a goat and praying your eyebrows didn't freeze into icicles before sunrise. And that was just the beginning. When winter sunk its icy teeth into medieval villages, neighbors weren't just neighbors, they were lifelines. Every village had unofficial winter watchers, often the elderly or children too young to work the fields, but sharp enough to notice who hadn't shown up at the market or whose chimney had stopped smoking. These folks were the medieval version of neighborhood patrol. No reflective vests, just a lot more wool and the occasional sheep. If a household's fire went out, it was practically an emergency. A kind soul might rush over with a glowing coal wrapped in cloth, or better yet, open their smoky, overcrowded door for the night. Sure, that meant squeezing 4 extra bodies into an already packed hut, but it beat finding frozen friends come spring. Communal food stores mattered too. In the cruelest winters, entire villages would pool their last salted meat, grains, and dried roots. Nobody had much, but grim charity sometimes spelled the difference between limping into spring or never getting up at all. Even the kids stepped up. They ran messages, fetched firewood, shared embers. No one was too small to matter when the frost came knocking. Sure, feuds happened. Someone always borrowed the good cooking pot and forgot to return it. But grudges thawed when survival froze everything else. One day you might be mad at your neighbor. The next, they're the only reason your toes haven't turned black. In the heart of winter, the village became a single stubborn, snoring, smoky organism. Dysfunctional, hilarious, but united by one purpose: to endure. And while layering cloaks and spooning the family goat were fine first steps, there was another crucial winter defense: prayer. Faith in the medieval world wasn't a Sunday hobby. It was hourly armor. When the fire dimmed to embers and the walls creaked under icy gusts, families knelt in prayer. Please, God, keep the roof on and my feet warm. Might have sounded like a joke, but it wasn't. Saints weren't just stained glass celebrities. Saint Blaise was invoked to ward off throat infections. No joke when a single cough could spiral into a burial by January. Saint Nicholas, long before becoming Santa, was asked to protect households from ruin. Superstition wasn't decoration, it was strategy. Some families sprinkled holy water near the hearth to block out evil spirits, or maybe just drafts. Others marked doorways with blessed chalk, desperate to invite in warmth and luck. Candles burned all night, blessed by priests or the holiest grandma in the village, flickering defiance against the icy dark. And in moments of pure desperation, promises flowed like melted snow. Dear Lord, if we survive this night, I'll forgive the neighbor who keeps stealing our turnips. Prayer wasn't an abstract comfort, it was survival. Not for riches, just for another breath, another sunrise, another shot at spring. But prayer alone didn't warm fingers or fill stomachs. So peasants turned to their second line of defense: creativity. Take bedding, for example. If you were lucky, you had something resembling a mattress, a tick stuffed with straw or old rags. But most just piled whatever was available: dry grass, moss, spare tunics, even sacks of grain. It wasn't luxury, it was insulation. And Dante laughed. Cuddling up with a half-empty sack of barley could mean the difference between waking up and, well, not. Nightwear? Not a thing. You slept in your day clothes. Why waste time changing when layering was your only strategy? Some even slept with their boots on. Uncomfortable? Yes. But frostbite was worse than blisters, and sleeping arrangements were strategic. The youngest and oldest were placed in the middle of the bed pile, sandwiched by the sturdiest bodies for warmth. It was like being a human hot water bottle, but with snoring, smells, and someone inevitably stealing the blanket you didn't have. Oh, and privacy? That was a fairy tale. Families crammed into one room, one bed, sometimes even one blanket. You learned early not to complain when Grandpa's feet found your ribs at 3 a.m. If someone in the household got sick, and someone always did, the whole place turned into a medieval ER. No sterile sheets, no nurse call buttons. Just herbal poultices, whispered prayers, and the grim hope that your fever wouldn't turn into a funeral. And yet, people endured. Not with grand gestures, but with gritty little habits. Drying damp socks by the hearth. Turning broth bones into a second soup. Using every scrap of cloth to plug drafts. Nothing went to waste. Nothing was taken for granted. Because in winter, survival was the only victory that mattered. Now let's talk food, or the barely there version of it. Winter meals were less about flavor and more about survival. Think of the saddest stew you've ever seen. Now remove half the ingredients. What remained was often a grayish broth with a potato-like root, if you were lucky, and a suspicious chunk of meat that had seen better centuries. Spice? Forget it. Salt was a treasure. Pepper was practically a myth. Peasants relied on whatever they'd managed to preserve during the harvest: dried beans, salted pork, if they had a pig, cabbage stored in cellars, and turnips. So many turnips. If you hated turnips, too bad. By January, it was turnip for breakfast o'clock every day. And bread. Oh, bread. If fresh loaves were a dream, winter bread was a cruel joke. Sometimes made from barley, oats, or even ground-up acorns mixed with bits of sawdust to stretch the dough. Yes, actual sawdust. Not gourmet, but it didn't kill you. Usually. Meals were often cooked in a single pot over the central fire, and that pot never really got cleaned. Scraping the bottom meant getting a bite of last week's dinner, or last month's. It all blended together in a gray-brown mystery soup that fed the body, if not the soul. Drinks? Water wasn't always safe, so weak ale was the go-to hydration, even for kids. A warm mug of barely alcoholic ale was considered downright medicinal. Cold, hard cider made from old apples was another winter staple, and not just because it dulled the pain of existing through February. There were no cheat days, no snacks hidden in the pantry. If you were lucky, you had a pantry. If you were really lucky, there was something inside it besides cobwebs and regret, so every bite was cherished. Even the worst, driest, burnt-edge crust could feel like a blessing. Not because it was tasty, but because it meant you'd made it one more day. But food and fire weren't the only concerns. there was another threat that crept in with the cold, and it didn't knock. We're talking illness. Winter was flu season, plague season, mystery cough that turns deadly season. And with every window sealed, if you had one, every body packed into tight quarters and no real sanitation, germs threw a party, and everyone was invited. Colds spread faster than gossip. Fevers passed through huts like wildfire, and there were no thermometers, no aspirin, no take two and rest. If your condition got worse, the treatment was either A, a prayer circle, or B, bloodletting. Sometimes both. Neither worked particularly well. Doctors? Huh. If you lived in a tiny village, you didn't have access to any trained physician. Your medical expert was likely an old woman with a herb pouch, a suspicious mole, and stories about curing a goat once. Honestly, she probably had the best survival rate. Cures were creative. Onion poultices, warm beer compresses, burning feathers near your face to smoke out the sickness. If it sounded like a punishment, it was probably a remedy. And when things got really grim, when someone died, it wasn't just heartbreaking, it was terrifying. Because if they got sick and didn't make it, what about you? Death wasn't a stranger. It lived in the same hut and slept by the fire. Yet somehow, through all the coughing, sniffling, and questionable treatments, life continued. Babies were born. Songs were sung. Jokes were told, even if laughter triggered a coughing fit. Because even in the darkest, coldest moments, people still found reasons to smile. Now let us clear up a common myth, that medieval peasants just sat around waiting for death all winter. Far from it. They worked, constantly. Sure, the fields were frozen, but that didn't mean they got a holiday. Winter was when the real behind-the-scenes peasant grind kicked in. Clothes needed mending, tools had to be sharpened, nets repaired, barrels sealed, firewood chopped. And if you didn't have enough firewood, you found some, or froze. Some peasants took up small crafts to make a little extra coin or trade, spinning wool, weaving baskets, carving wooden utensils. Every idle hand was a missed opportunity to stay alive. Even kids had winter chores, feeding animals, turning compost, grinding grain. Childhood was less play and more, please carry this heavy thing. And speaking of animals, livestock didn't magically hibernate. They needed feeding, shelter, milking. That meant early mornings in the freezing dark, trudging into a barely warmer barn to deal with moody goats and impatient pigs. Not exactly the cozy pastoral scene you'd find on a holiday card. But here's the thing, these tasks weren't just work. They were rhythm, purpose, a defense against despair. Keeping busy meant staying sharp, staying warm, staying human. When you had no control over the temperature or your fate, control over your daily chores felt like power, like you were still in the game, not just waiting to be taken off the board. And for a medieval peasant, that mattered. Despite everything and the cold, the hunger, the sickness, the hard labor, winter wasn't just about surviving. It also had moments. Moments of warmth, moments of humanity, moments that, strangely enough, made it all bearable. Families huddled around the fire didn't just sit in silence. They told stories, long winding tales of saints and monsters, heroes and fools. Oral tradition was Netflix Campfire Edition, and everyone had a favorite tale, even if it had been told 100 times. Singing, too, was common. Simple songs, work songs, even cheeky ones that probably wouldn't make it past YouTube's moderation. Music was a kind of warmth, not for the body, but for the spirit. And let's be honest, in a hut full of unwashed people, anything that lifted morale was worth repeating. Games were played, with rocks, sticks, carved dice, riddles. You didn't need a board game to pass the time. You just needed imagination, and maybe a slightly competitive uncle. And sometimes there was even joy. A birth, a marriage, a feast day, a sudden sunny afternoon where the snow melted just enough to remind you that spring still existed, somewhere. In the worst conditions, people still laughed, still teased, still dreamed. Because that is the truth behind every medieval winter survival story. They weren't just stories of cold and death. They were stories of stubborn, joyful life. Eventually, winter gave up. Not dramatically, not all at once. Just slowly. One day, the wind didn't bite quite so hard. A drip echoed from the edge of the thatch roof. A patch of earth peeked out from under the snow, brown and stubborn. And just like that, the season of survival shifted into the season of work. Spring wasn't a relief. It was a signal. Time to plant. Time to fix fences, dig ditches, re-roof houses, reseed fields. Time to run, not rest. Nature didn't hand out medals for making it through the cold. It just handed you a shovel. But there was a kind of triumph in it. A quiet, gritty pride. You'd survived. You, your family, your neighbors. Not without scars, not without loss. But the fire never went out. The roof mostly held. The last turnip got shared, not hoarded, and that counted for something. Because medieval winter wasn't a story of comfort. It was a story of endurance. Of communities bound not by luxury, but by grit. Of people who didn't just huddle and pray, but laughed, worked, shared, and refused to be frozen out of history. So what can we take from all this? Most of us will never know what it's like to scrape frost off the inside of our own bedroom walls, or sleep in a pile of relatives just to avoid freezing solid. We have thermostats, heated blankets, microwave popcorn. But maybe that's why it's worth remembering. Because behind the castles and kings, the wars and royal decrees, history was also shaped by people who just refused to give up, who faced down endless winters with cracked hands and thin shoes and said, "Nope, not today." The medieval peasant isn't just a background character in the story of civilization. They are the story. Without them, nothing lasts. No harvests, no armies, no progress. Just frozen fields and silence. So the next time your Wi-Fi lags or your oat milk is out of stock, take a second to honor the ones who came before. The quiet, mud-covered champions of resilience. They didn't ask for applause. They asked for warmth. So here's to the nameless. To the men and women who never wrote books, never sat on thrones, never had portraits hung in gilded halls, but who survived, who endured cold so fierce it cracked stone, nights so long they swallowed hope, and hunger so sharp it gnawed at the soul. Here's to the ones who patched roofs with scraps, shared soup with strangers, whispered prayers into the frozen dark, and got up the next morning to do it all again. History remembers kings. We remember them. Because they're still here, in every act of quiet endurance, in every shared blanket, every neighbor who checks in, every stubborn refusal to quit when things get hard. The past isn't just in books, it's in our blood. And somewhere, in every one of us, there's a medieval peasant, tough, tired, unbreakable, carrying the fire forward. So the next time you're adjusting your thermostat because the room feels a little chilly, or complaining that your blanket isn't quite thick enough, think back. Think of those medieval families crammed together in a one-room hut, wearing everything they owned, sharing body heat with livestock, and falling asleep to the sound of the wind howling like a wolf just outside the thin walls of mud and thatch. They didn't have the luxury to complain. They adapted. They endured. And in doing so, they laid the quiet, unseen groundwork for the world we live in now. Their winters weren't Instagram-worthy. No aesthetic photos of cozy firesides or latte art. Just survival, plain and simple. And honestly, that might be the most inspiring part of all. Because their story isn't about comfort. It's about resilience. About facing the worst that nature could throw at them, year after brutal year, and still managing to tell stories, sing songs, and keep each other warm. It is easy to romanticize the past, but it is more powerful to recognize the grit it took just to live through it. So here's to them, the unsung survivors of history's longest, coldest nights. But here's the twist. While winter was harsh and unforgiving, it also forged something unbreakable within these communities, a deep sense of connection. Neighbors weren't just fellow villagers, they were family by choice, bound together by shared hardship. When the fire flickered low, it wasn't just warmth they shared, it was hope. Trade, gossip, jokes, and even grudges were all part of the social glue. Sometimes a frozen foot or a lost turnip would spark a feud, But those were rare compared to the bonds formed in shared suffering. And those bonds carried on beyond winter's death grip. They were the threads that held villages together year after year, generation after generation. The winter was a test, yes, but it was also a reminder. Survival was never a solo mission. It was a collective act of stubborn humanity. So next time you complain about a chilly morning or a power outage, remember the medieval peasants, whose winters lasted half the year, and whose warmth came from the people beside them, not just the fire. Because at the end of the day, the greatest survival skill of all might just be connection. As spring finally emerged from beneath the snow's cold clutch, the land began to breathe again. Buds pushed through frozen soil, rivers swelled with melting ice, and a delicate green started to reclaim the gray. For the villagers, spring was more than just a season. It was a rebirth, a fresh start. After months of scarcity and hardship, the promise of abundance stirred hope in their hearts. Fields had to be plowed, seeds sown, and fences repaired. Every hand was needed, and the old wisdom passed down through generations came alive once more. Children ran barefoot through muddy paths, laughter echoing where silence had once reigned. Songs were sung, stories shared, and even the grimmest faces softened under the sun's gentle touch. But spring was also a time of cautious optimism. The past winter had left scars, weak livestock, depleted food stores, and a few lost souls. The villagers knew that survival wasn't guaranteed, only earned anew with every planting and harvest. Yet, through every trial, the spirit of community endured, knitting lives together tighter than ever. Spring didn't just revive the land. It rekindled the heart of a people who had learned to thrive in spite of the odds. With the arrival of spring's first warmth, the village slowly stirred from its long slumber. The once barren fields, cracked and dry under winter's grip, began to soften under the gentle rain. Farmers gathered their tools, ready to start the season's work anew. The rhythmic sound of hoes striking earth and seeds being scattered was music to their ears, a sign of life returning. Elders watched with knowing eyes, their hearts swelling with pride and cautious hope. They had seen many springs before, each one a testament to resilience and the cycle of life. Families worked side by side, sharing stories and laughter between tasks. Children chased butterflies and dipped their toes in the streams, oblivious to the hard work that lay ahead. Despite the promise, uncertainty lingered in the air. The previous winter had tested their strength, and there was no guarantee that the next harvest would be plentiful. Still, hope was their most precious crop, and they nurtured it with care, tending both soil and spirit. Spring was more than a season. It was a renewal of faith in tomorrow. The sun climbed higher each day, casting longer shadows over the blossoming orchards. Birds returned in flocks, filling the air with cheerful songs that seemed to chase away any lingering doubts. In the village square, preparations for the spring festival were underway. Colorful ribbons fluttered from lampposts, and stalls were set up to showcase the season's first fruits and handmade crafts. The air buzzed with excitement and anticipation. Neighbors who had been apart all winter embraced warmly, sharing news and promises to support one another. Amidst the festivities, the village storyteller took his place beneath the ancient oak, ready to weave tales of old heroes and timeless lessons. Children gathered eagerly, eyes wide with wonder. It was a moment to celebrate not just the Earth's rebirth, but the bonds that held the community together through every trial. As twilight painted the sky with hues of pink and gold, laughter and music filled the village, a testament to enduring hope and joy. As night settled, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the lively festival. The scent of fresh bread and roasted chestnuts mingled in the cool air, inviting all to partake in the feast. Dancers twirled in colorful costumes, their movements weaving stories of old, while musicians played lively tunes on fiddles and flutes. Elders shared memories of past festivals, their voices filled with nostalgia and pride. Young couples stole shy glances, dreaming of the future they hoped to build together. In this circle of light and laughter, the village felt alive with promise and unity, a beacon of strength through every season. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if blessing the celebration below. The morning sun rose gently over the hills, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold. Birds sang their morning songs, welcoming a new day filled with hope. Villagers began to stir, tending to their gardens and preparing for the market. The air was fresh and crisp, carrying the promise of opportunities and new beginnings. Children laughed as they chased each other between stalls, their joy infectious. Merchants arranged their colorful goods, eager to share their crafts and harvests. In every corner, life moved with purpose and harmony, a testament to the hard work and care that bound the community together. As the day unfolded, the village thrived in its simple beauty, a small world full of dreams and endless possibilities. The village elder stood quietly by the ancient oak tree, watching the hustle and bustle of the market. His eyes sparkled with wisdom, reflecting years of stories and lessons learned. He nodded approvingly as neighbors greeted each other warmly, their bonds strengthened by shared experiences. The elder knew that this unity was the true treasure of the village. Nearby, a young couple exchanged smiles, their hands intertwined with the promise of a future together. Hope and love were alive in every corner of the village square. As the day wore on, laughter and chatter filled the air, weaving a tapestry of life that would be remembered for generations. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the village, the elder made his way back to his humble home. The soft crunch of leaves beneath his feet was a gentle reminder of the changing seasons. Inside, a fire crackled softly in the hearth, inviting a sense of peace and reflection. He settled into his worn wooden chair, his thoughts drifting to the future of the village and the children who would inherit its stories. With a contented sigh, he reached for his journal, ready to record the day's moments, small but meaningful fragments of life that together formed the heart of their community. Night had fully embraced the village now, stars twinkling like scattered diamonds across the velvet sky. The elder's thoughts wandered to the legends passed down through generations, tales of bravery, kindness, and hope. He smiled softly, knowing that each story held a lesson, a spark that could light the way in dark times. Closing his journal, he whispered a silent wish for peace and unity to remain forever in their little corner of the world. As night wrapped the village in its silent cloak, the stories of the past remained alive in the hearts of every inhabitant. It was these memories, filled with courage and hope, that united the community and strengthened their bonds. Even in the face of challenges, the village stood firm, guided by the wisdom of the elders and the collective desire for a better future. Thus, the light of unity and kindness continued to shine, illuminating the paths of those who believed in the power of stories and the value of friendship. Thanks for watching. Stay warm out there.